The fluorescent lights in the pediatric intensive care unit never sleep. They hum with a constant, merciless brightness that makes 3 in the morning feel exactly like 3 in the afternoon. Marcus Webb had learned to hate those lights over the past 72 hours, the way they exposed every crack in the waiting room chairs, every stain on the linen floor, every tear track on a desperate parent's face. He sat hunched forward in one of those chairs now, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Through the observation window, he could see his daughter Emma, 8 years old, connected to machines that beeped and whirred with mechanical indifference. Her small chest rose and fell with the ventilator's rhythm, not her own. The rare blood disorder had attacked so suddenly, so viciously, that 3 days ago she had been laughing at cartoons, and now she was fighting for each artificial breath. The doctors had been clear. Emma needed a specialized stem cell transplant within the next week, or her body would shut down completely. The procedure existed. The donor had been found. But the cost sat like a stone in Marcus's stomach. $275,000. His insurance had capped out at $50,000. The hospital's financial aid office had offered him payment plans that would take 40 years to complete. 40 years his daughter didn't have. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marcus worked as a night custodian at Meridian Towers, one of Philadelphia's most exclusive residential buildings. The job paid $18 an hour, which had felt like a fortune when he'd landed it 2 years ago after Emma's mother vanished without warning, leaving only a note that said she couldn't do this anymore. He had built a small life for them, a rented studio apartment in Kensington, carefully budgeted meals, library books instead of new toys, and the quiet pride of knowing his daughter never went to bed hungry or afraid. But $18 an hour couldn't save her life. He had called everyone. His brother in Arizona had 2 kids of his own and barely made rent. His father had been dead for 6 years. The crowdfunding campaign he'd set up with shaking hands had raised $11,000 in 3 days, mostly from neighbors who had almost nothing themselves to give. Mrs. Chen from downstairs had donated $200, money she'd been saving for cataract surgery. Miguel, who worked the day shift at Meridian, had organized a collection among the staff that brought in another $900. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The doctors had started using words like comfort care and quality of remaining time. Marcus had nodded through those conversations, as if he understood, as if he accepted, but inside he was screaming. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the burning. Sleep was impossible. Food tasted like ash. The world had narrowed to this single point, his daughter dying while he stood helpless, watching through glass. "Mr. Webb?" Marcus looked up. A nurse stood in the doorway, her face carefully neutral. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." "I'm not expecting anyone," Marcus said, his voice rough from disuse. "She's very insistent, says she's from Meridian Towers." Marcus frowned but stood, his back aching from 3 days in those chairs. He followed the nurse down the corridor to a small consultation room, usually reserved for delivering bad news. The woman waiting inside didn't belong in a place like this. She belonged on magazine covers, in boardrooms, in spaces where the lighting was soft and designed to flatter. Victoria Ashford was 41 years old and looked like someone who had never experienced a single day of uncertainty in her life. Her dark hair was pulled back in a flawless twist. Her coat probably cost more than Marcus earned in 3 months. She stood by the window, backlit by the city lights, and when she turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Webb," she said. Her voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. "My name is Victoria Ashford. I own Meridian Towers." Marcus stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of his stained work pants, his wrinkled shirt that he'd been wearing for 2 days straight, the stubble covering his jaw. "If this is about my shifts, I called in. I explained about my daughter. This isn't about your shifts." Victoria gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit." Marcus remained standing. "With respect, ma'am, I don't have time for whatever this is. My daughter is dying," Victoria finished, and something flickered across her face too quickly to identify. "I know. I've spoken with her medical team." The words hit Marcus like cold water. "You what?" "I made some calls," Victoria said simply. "Dr. Reeves was very forthcoming once I explained my interest in the case." "Your interest?" Marcus felt anger beginning to replace the numbness. "Why would you have any interest in my daughter?" Victoria moved to the small table and opened a leather portfolio. Inside were medical records, insurance documents, financial statements, all of Emma's information, laid out like a business proposal. Emma Webb, age 8, diagnosed with aplastic anemia 3 days ago, requires immediate stem cell transplantation, total cost of procedure and follow-up care, approximately $275,000. Current funds raised, $20,843. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "How did you get those records? That's private information. You had no right." "I have every right," Victoria interrupted, her voice hardening just slightly. "When I want information, I get it. That's how the world works, Mr. Webb. The question isn't how I got these records. The question is what I'm prepared to do with them." She pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table between them. It was a check, already filled out, made payable to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The amount read $275,000. Marcus stared at it. The numbers seemed to pulse under the harsh light. His throat closed. "I will pay for Emma's procedure," Victoria said quietly. "All of it. The transplant, the recovery, the follow-up care. I'll cover whatever the insurance won't touch. Your daughter will live." Marcus couldn't breathe. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this?" Victoria walked to the window, her back to him now. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, grown softer, almost vulnerable. 23 years ago, I had a daughter. Her name was Sophie. She was 6 years old when she developed leukemia. We had every resource in the world, the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, and she died anyway. I watched her slip away despite everything money could buy. She turned back to Marcus, and for the first time, he saw something raw in her eyes. "For 23 years, I've lived in a penthouse that feels like a mausoleum. I built an empire because I didn't know what else to do with the rage. I've spent decades surrounded by people who want things from me, money, access, status, but no one has ever needed me. Not really. Not the way. Your daughter needs someone right now." Marcus felt his legs weaken. He gripped the back of the chair. "I don't understand what you want from me." Victoria's expression shifted, hardened again, became something that looked almost like shame wrapped in steel. "I want you to understand that this money comes with a condition." There it was. The catch. Marcus had known it was coming, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. "What condition?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "I'm 41 years old, Mr. Webb. I've had 3 marriages, all disasters. Men who wanted my money or my name or the doors I could open for them. I've spent 2 decades being desired and never wanted, being courted and never seen." She paused, her hands gripping the back of the chair across from him. "I am tired of being alone. I'm tired of waking up in an empty bed in an empty apartment and wondering if this is all there is." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want this money, if you want to save your daughter's life, you spend one night with me." Victoria's voice was flat now, clinical, as if she were negotiating a business deal. One night in my home, and in the morning the check is yours. Emma gets her transplant. You get your daughter back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus stood frozen, his mind unable to process what he'd just heard. This woman, this stranger, this billionaire who could buy and sell his entire world without noticing, was offering to save Emma's life in exchange for his body. "You're asking me to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm offering you a transaction," Victoria said, and something in her voice cracked just barely. "I know what this sounds like. I know what it makes me. But I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm asking for one night where I'm not alone. One night where someone is there because I saved their child, because I mattered in a way that counted." Marcus felt bile rising in his throat. This is insane. This is the offer. Victoria's mask was back in place now, perfect and cold. "Emma has maybe 5 days before her window closes. I can have the money transferred to the hospital by tomorrow morning, or I can walk out of here and you can keep crowdfunding and praying and watching your daughter die by inches." "You're talking about prostitution," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "You're asking me to sell myself to save my child." "I'm talking about survival," Victoria shot back. "Don't pretend the world operates on nobility, Mr. Webb. You think the pharmaceutical companies pricing that transplant at $250,000 are being noble. You think the insurance companies capping your coverage are worried about morality? This entire system is predicated on transactions. I'm just being honest about mine." Marcus wanted to scream. He wanted to throw the check in her face, tell her to go to hell, walk out with whatever dignity he had left. But Emma's face flickered behind his eyes. Emma laughing at his terrible jokes. Emma falling asleep on his shoulder during movie nights. Emma in that hospital bed with tubes running into her small arms. "I need to think," he said hoarsely. "You have until 6 a.m., Victoria replied. She placed a business card on the table beside the check. "That's my private number. Call me when you've made your decision." She moved toward the door, then paused without looking back. "For what it's worth, Mr. Webb, I'm not proud of this, but I stopped caring about pride a long time ago." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Marcus stood alone in the consultation room, staring at the check on the table. $275,000. Emma's life. His soul. He thought about all the philosophy his mother had tried to teach him when he was young, about dignity and self-respect and the things that money couldn't buy. But his mother had never watched her child suffocate. She had never had to choose between principle and survival. Marcus picked up the check with trembling hands. The paper felt obscene, weighted with implications he couldn't bear to examine. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, then walked back to the PICU waiting room like a man in a dream. Through the window, Emma lay motionless. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. A nurse checked her vitals and marked something on a chart. Life, reduced to numbers and measurements and time running out. Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at Victoria's business card. The numbers blurred as his eyes filled with tears. He thought about what it would mean to say yes, the shame he would carry, the knowledge that he had bought his daughter's life with his own degradation. He thought about Emma growing up and eventually asking how they had afforded the transplant and what lie he would tell her. But he also thought about Emma not growing up at all. His finger hovered over the phone's keypad. Outside, the city continued its indifferent march through the night. Ambulances wailed in the distance. Someone laughed in another room. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless, merciless song. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to pray, but the only words that came were please and help, and I don't know what to do. At 4:37 in the morning, he still hadn't made the call. He sat with his head in his hands, the business card crumpled in his fist, wondering what kind of world created choices like this, wondering what kind of woman made offers like this, wondering what kind of man he would become if he said yes, and wondering, with a desperation that felt like drowning, what kind of father he would be if he said no. The sun would rise in 90 minutes. Emma's machines would keep breathing for her. Victoria Ashford would be waiting in her penthouse tomb, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. And Marcus Webb would have to decide whether his daughter's life was worth more than his dignity, whether love could justify compromise, whether there was any principle strong enough to watch your child die for. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. The fluorescent lights hummed and waited. At 5:43 in the morning, Marcus Webb stood outside Meridian Towers with his phone in his hand and Victoria Ashford's number on the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button, trembling so badly he had to grip his wrist with his other hand to steady it. He hadn't called her, not at 6 a.m. like she'd demanded, because at 5:55, sitting in that PICU waiting room, with dawn bleeding gray light through the windows, Marcus had realized something that stopped him cold. He couldn't do it, not because of pride or principle or any of the noble reasons he'd been turning over in his mind all night. He couldn't do it because if he traded himself for Emma's life, every time he looked at his daughter, he would see the price he'd paid. Every smile, every laugh, every milestone would be stained with the memory of that transaction. And eventually, she would see it too. She would see it in his eyes, in the way he held himself, in the careful way he never quite met her gaze when she asked about the transplant. He would save her life and lose himself. And a version of Marcus who was lost, who was hollow, who had sold the core of who he was. That version couldn't be the father Emma needed. Not really. Not for the long years ahead. So instead of calling Victoria, Marcus had called the hospital's palliative care team and asked them to come talk to him. He had prepared himself to make a different kind of choice, one that would destroy him just as thoroughly, but at least wouldn't require him to become someone he couldn't recognize. But then something had happened that Marcus didn't understand. At 6:15 a.m., Dr. Reeves had appeared in the waiting room, her face carefully composed but her eyes bright with something that looked like cautious hope. "Mr. Webb, I need you to come with me. There's been a development." Marcus had followed her in a daze, expecting more bad news, preparing himself for the worst. But instead, Dr. Reeves had led him to her office and pulled up financial records on her computer screen. "An anonymous donation has been made to the hospital's charitable fund," she said slowly, watching his face. "The full amount for Emma's procedure, $275,000. The donor specified that it should be allocated to cover your daughter's transplant and all associated care." Marcus had stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the words. Anonymous. The payment came through a law firm. They won't reveal the donor's identity. But Mr. Webb, this means Emma can have the transplant. We can schedule it for tomorrow morning if the team is ready. Marcus had asked to see the payment details. The law firm was Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious in Philadelphia, the kind of firm that represented people like Victoria Ashford. But the donation had been structured carefully, routed through the hospital's general fund, impossible to trace directly back to any individual. She had paid anyway, even though he hadn't called, even though he hadn't agreed to her terms, even though he had, in effect, refused her. And that refusal, that choice to walk away from the offer, even knowing what it would cost him, that had apparently broken something in Victoria Ashford. Now, standing outside Meridian Towers, as the morning shift began to arrive, Marcus knew he had to see her. Not because he owed her anything, though he did, but because the woman who had made that terrible offer and then paid anyway despite being rejected, that woman was someone he needed to understand. He rode the service elevator up to the penthouse floor. his custodian's key card still active despite missing 3 days of work. The hallway was silent, carpeted in deep burgundy that absorbed every sound. Victoria's door was at the end, solid mahogany with brass numbers that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. He knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened. Victoria stood in the doorway wearing not the polished armor of business attire, but a simple white shirt and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger this way and infinitely more tired. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You didn't call," she said quietly. "No," Marcus agreed. "I didn't. But you're here now. Emma's getting her transplant tomorrow morning. Someone made an anonymous donation." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "That's wonderful news." "It was you," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what you're talking about. You paid for it anyway, even though I didn't call, even though I said no by not saying yes." Victoria's jaw tightened. "I think you should leave, Mr. Webb. You have what you need. There's no reason for you to be here." "Why?" Marcus asked, and his voice cracked on the word. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm a billionaire with more money than I know what to do with," Victoria said flatly. "Consider it charity. Consider whatever helps you sleep at night." "That's not why," Marcus said. He took a step closer, and Victoria took a step back into her apartment, a reflexive retreat. "You made an offer, a transaction, terms and conditions. And then when I didn't meet those terms, you paid anyway. People like you don't do things like that. There's always a reason." "Maybe I'm not like other people like me," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "Or maybe," Marcus said gently, "you made that offer because you were in pain and desperate and you didn't know any other way to ask for what you needed. And then when I didn't show up, when I chose my daughter over your deal, something about that choice made you realize you didn't want it that way anyway." Victoria's face went very still. For a long moment she just stared at him. Then she turned and walked deeper into the apartment, leaving the door open behind her. Marcus took it as an invitation. He stepped inside and closed the door. The penthouse was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like what he'd imagined. The space was enormous, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture arranged with geometric precision. But it was also empty in a way that had nothing to do with square footage. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the shelves, no clutter, no life, no evidence that anyone actually lived here. It looked like a hotel suite maintained by someone who had checked in years ago and forgotten to leave. Victoria stood by the windows, her arms crossed over her chest, staring out at the Philadelphia skyline. "You should have taken the deal," she said without turning around. "You should have done whatever it took to save your daughter. That's what a good father does." "A good father teaches his daughter what kind of person to be," Marcus replied. "If I'd accepted your offer, I would have been teaching her that people can be bought, that dignity has a price, that love means sacrificing everything, even the values you want to pass on. So you chose your pride over her life." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I chose to trust that there might be another way. I chose to believe that the world wasn't quite as dark as your offer suggested." Victoria turned to face him then, and there were tears streaming down her face. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I am so tired of being alone. I'm tired of being surrounded by people who want things from me and never see me. I'm tired of going to charity galas where everyone smiles and says lovely things and no one means any of it. I'm tired of waking up at 3 in the morning and realizing I can't remember the last time someone touched me with kindness instead of calculation." She sank onto the white leather sofa, her shoulders shaking. "When I saw Emma's file, when I saw you sitting in that waiting room looking like your whole world was ending, I felt something I haven't felt in 23 years. I felt necessary. I felt like maybe I could matter to someone in a way that was real. Marcus moved slowly to sit beside her, maintaining a careful distance. So you made the worst possible offer you could think of. I made the only offer I knew how to make, Victoria said bitterly. Everything in my life is transactional. Marriages, friendships, business relationships. It's all negotiation and terms and getting what you want by offering what someone else needs. I forgot that some things can't be bought. And when I didn't call? Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When you didn't call, I realized you'd rather let your daughter die than compromise yourself that way. And I understood that I'd offered you something worse than death. I'd asked you to kill the person you were so Emma could live, and you refused. She looked at him directly. You broke me because you reminded me that integrity still exists somewhere in this world, that not everyone can be bought. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You saved my daughter's life. I couldn't let her die because of my ugliness, Victoria said softly. Whatever darkness is in me, Emma doesn't deserve to pay for it. There's darkness in all of us, Marcus said. You just live in a world where you're powerful enough to act on it. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. They sat in silence for a while, two people from utterly different worlds, connected by a moment of crisis and choice. Outside, the city woke fully, traffic building, life resuming its ordinary patterns. But inside this sterile penthouse, something was shifting. I need to ask you something, Victoria said finally, and I need you to be honest. Okay? Do you hate me? Marcus considered the question carefully. No, he said. I think I pity you. I think you've built a fortress around yourself, so high that you forgot how to open the door. And I think the offer you made came from a place of such deep loneliness that it broke through every wall you've built and showed you something about yourself you didn't want to see. Victoria closed her eyes. I've never felt so ashamed in my life. Shame means you still have a conscience, Marcus said. That's something. What do I do with it? Victoria asked. The shame, the loneliness, all of it. What do I do now? Marcus thought about his own life, about the nights after Emma's mother left, when he'd felt so alone he could barely breathe, about learning to accept help from neighbors, about building community from nothing, about discovering that vulnerability wasn't weakness. You could start by letting someone see you, really see you, not the billionaire, not the empire builder, just the person. I don't know how to do that. Neither did I, Marcus said, but I had to learn when Emma came into my life, because children demand authenticity. They see through every mask. Victoria looked at him with something like hunger in her eyes. Tell me about her, about Emma. So Marcus did. He talked about Emma's obsession with dinosaurs, how she could name 30 different species and their geological periods. He talked about her terrible habit of reading under the covers with a flashlight after bedtime. He talked about the way she made him breakfast on Father's Day, usually burning the toast but arranging it on the plate with such careful pride. He talked about her fear of thunderstorms and her absolute fearlessness when it came to playground equipment. He talked about the person his daughter was becoming, funny and brave and sometimes frustrating and entirely herself. And as he talked, Victoria listened with an intensity that felt almost desperate, as if she were starving and his words were sustenance. When he finally stopped, she was crying again, but quietly this time. Sophie loved dinosaurs too, she whispered. She had this stuffed triceratops she carried everywhere. We buried it with her. Tell me about Sophie, Marcus said gently. Victoria hesitated, then began to speak. Her words came slowly at first, then faster, as if a dam had broken. She talked about Sophie's laugh, how it had sounded like bells, about her habit of narrating everything she did, talking to herself in this running commentary that was both hilarious and oddly philosophical, about the way she had insisted on wearing her Halloween costume, a dragon suit, for 3 weeks straight until it fell apart. About the morning they got the diagnosis and how the world had simply stopped making sense. She died on a Tuesday, Victoria said, which seems absurd, doesn't it? That the worst day of your life can fall on such an ordinary day of the week. I remember thinking, how can it be Tuesday? How can the world just continue on Tuesday? Did you have anyone with you? Marcus asked. My husband at the time, my third husband, Richard. Victoria's voice went flat. He left 6 months later, said he couldn't handle my grief, said I'd become someone he didn't recognize. She laughed bitterly. He was right about that part. Marcus understood something then about the offer Victoria had made. It hadn't just been about loneliness or desperation. It had been about wanting someone to stay, someone who couldn't leave because they were bound by transaction, by debt, by obligation, because everyone else had left, and Victoria had concluded that the only way to keep someone close was to buy them. I'm not leaving, Marcus said quietly. Victoria looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. What? Right now, this conversation. I'm not leaving because you paid for Emma's transplant. I'm not sitting here because I owe you. I'm here because I see you, Victoria, and I think you need someone to see you more than you've ever needed anything. Her breath caught. You don't know me. I know you made a terrible offer because you were in pain. I know you paid anyway when I refused. I know you've been carrying your daughter's death for 23 years, with no one to help you hold the weight. I know that right now, without all your armor, you look like someone who needs a friend. I don't know how to be someone's friend, Victoria whispered. I only know how to be useful or necessary or powerful. Then maybe, Marcus said, you could learn. They sat together as the morning stretched toward afternoon. At some point, Victoria ordered food, Chinese takeout from a place Marcus recognized as the same restaurant, where he and Emma sometimes got dumplings as a special treat. They ate in near silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty, but full of possibility. Victoria asked about Marcus's work, really asked, not in the polite way employers ask, but with genuine curiosity. He told her about the satisfaction of a floor polished to perfect shine, about the meditative quality of working alone in the quiet hours, about the strange intimacy of moving through spaces where people lived their lives and left traces of themselves behind. You see us at our most vulnerable, Victoria realized, when we think no one is watching. Everyone leaves evidence of who they really are, Marcus agreed. Photographs hidden in drawers, letters kept but never sent, the things you can't throw away even though you know you should. What does my apartment say about me? Victoria asked, gesturing at the pristine space around them. Marcus looked around carefully, then met her eyes. It says you're terrified of leaving evidence. It says you're trying to live without touching anything, so nothing can hurt you when it's gone. Victoria absorbed this, then nodded slowly. You're right. I've been living like a ghost in my own life. Over the following days, something unexpected developed. Marcus visited Victoria in the early mornings before heading to the hospital to be with Emma. He would stop by with coffee. Sometimes they would talk. Sometimes they would simply sit together in comfortable silence. Victoria began asking questions about the world Marcus lived in, genuinely curious about his neighbors, about Mrs. Chen and her cataract surgery fund, about Miguel and his dream of opening a restaurant someday. You have community, Victoria observed one morning, real community, people who show up for each other. We have to, Marcus said. We don't have safety nets made of money. We have safety nets made of each other. Victoria started asking what that looked like practically. How did it work? How did people coordinate? What were the systems? Marcus explained about meal trains when someone was sick, about childcare swaps, about the informal lending networks that kept people afloat between paychecks. He explained about Mrs. Chen watching Emma for free because Marcus had fixed her plumbing last winter, about how Miguel gave them leftover food from the restaurant where he worked weekends because Marcus had helped his son with homework. It's not charity, Marcus explained. It's reciprocity. Everyone contributes what they can. Everyone receives what they need. Victoria absorbed this like someone learning a foreign language. I've spent my entire life in a world where everything is transactional, but the transactions are always about individual gain. What you're describing is transactional too, but the goal is collective survival. Exactly, Marcus said. One morning, Victoria did something that surprised both of them. She asked if she could come with Marcus to visit Emma. Marcus hesitated. Are you sure? Hospitals aren't easy places for you. No, Victoria agreed. But Emma is the reason you and I are sitting here talking. I'd like to meet her, if you think that's appropriate. They went together that afternoon. Emma was awake, still weak from the transplant, but showing signs of improvement that made Marcus's chest ache with relief. When she saw her father, her face lit up with that smile that made everything else fall away. Daddy! She reached for him, and Marcus gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of the tubes and wires. Hey, dinosaur girl, how are you feeling? Tired, Emma admitted, but Dr. Reeves says my numbers are good. She says the new cells are working. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Marcus pulled back just enough to gesture toward Victoria, who stood near the door looking uncertain. Emma, this is my friend Victoria. She wanted to meet you. Emma studied Victoria with the unself-conscious directness of children. You're really pretty, she announced. Are you a movie star? Victoria laughed, surprised by the sound coming from her own throat. No, I'm not a movie star. I'm just someone who heard about your situation and wanted to help. Did you help pay for my operation? Emma asked with characteristic bluntness. Victoria glanced at Marcus, who gave a small nod. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Emma was silent for a moment, processing this. Then she said, Thank you. My daddy says when someone helps you, you should look them in the eyes and say thank you properly. She met Victoria's gaze directly. Thank you for saving my life. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She moved closer to the bed, kneeling so she was at Emma's level. You're welcome, Emma. I'm very glad I could help. Why did you help us? Emma asked. Daddy says you don't even know us. Victoria glanced up at Marcus, then back at Emma. I had a daughter once. Her name was Sophie. She loved dinosaurs just like you. She got very sick, and even though we tried everything, we couldn't save her. When I heard about you, I thought maybe I could make sure another little girl who loves dinosaurs got to stay with her daddy. Emma reached out and took Victoria's hand. The gesture was simple, instinctive, the way children reach for connection without calculation. I'm sorry Sophie died, she said seriously. That must make you very sad. Victoria couldn't speak. She just nodded, holding Emma's small hand in both of hers. My mommy left us, Emma continued matter-of-factly. Daddy says she loved me but couldn't stay. I don't really understand that, but it makes me sad sometimes too, so we can be sad together. And that's when Victoria broke completely. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking with sobs she'd held back for more than 2 decades. Emma, with the gentle wisdom of children who've faced their own mortality, simply held her hand and waited. Marcus stood back, watching this moment unfold, understanding that something profound was happening. Victoria had spent 23 years with her grief, locked away behind walls of wealth and control. and an 8-year-old girl had unlocked it with nothing more than honesty and an outstretched hand. When Victoria finally composed herself, she looked at Emma with something close to wonder. "You're a very special person, Emma Webb." "Daddy says everyone is special," Emma replied. "You just have to look for what makes them special. What makes you special?" Victoria thought about this seriously. "I don't know if I'm special, but I think maybe I'm learning to be." They stayed for another hour. Victoria asked Emma about dinosaurs and listened with genuine fascination as the girl launched into detailed explanations of the differences between various theropods. Marcus sat in the corner, watching Victoria transform from the brittle, armored woman who had made that terrible offer into someone softer, more open, more real. As they left the hospital together, Victoria turned to Marcus. "Thank you for letting me meet her." "Thank you for being gentle with her," Marcus replied. "And with yourself." They stood in the hospital parking lot as dusk settled over the city. Two people who had begun as billionaire and custodian, as desperate offer and dignified refusal, and were becoming something neither of them had names for yet. "I want to do something," Victoria said suddenly. "For the other families. The ones who don't have someone to make anonymous donations. The ones who are sitting in that waiting room right now wondering how they'll ever find the money." Marcus looked at her carefully. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to establish a fund, a real one, not just a one-time donation. Something sustainable that can help families facing exactly what you faced." She paused. "But I don't want to just throw money at it. I want to understand it. I want to build something that actually works." "That would be amazing," Marcus said quietly. "Do you know how many families are in that waiting room right now making impossible choices?" "Will you help me?" Victoria asked. "Not as my employee, not as someone who owes me, but as someone who understands what these families need because you've lived it." Marcus considered this. A partnership with Victoria Ashford could change countless lives, but it also meant staying connected to someone whose loneliness had driven her to make an offer he still couldn't fully process, someone who was clearly desperately learning how to be a person again. "Yes," he said finally, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "You have to promise me that you'll get help, real help, therapy, grief counseling, whatever you need, because I can't help you build something to help other people if you're still drowning yourself." Victoria's first instinct was to bristle, to defend herself, but then she stopped, took a breath, and nodded. "You're right. I've been running from Sophie's death for 23 years. Maybe it's time I stopped running." They stood together as the streetlights flickered on, marking the boundary between day and night, between who they had been and who they might become. Marcus didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The partnership they were forming would change both their lives in ways neither could predict. But challenges were coming, tests that would force both of them to confront not just Victoria's past, but the systemic forces that created situations like Marcus's in the first place. For now, though, they simply stood together in the gathering dark, two people who had found each other in the strangest of circumstances and discovered that sometimes the most profound connections begin with the courage to refuse, the wisdom to pay anyway, and the grace to meet each other as equals, despite every social structure insisting otherwise. 12:25 a.m. 3 months after Emma's transplant, Marcus Webb stood in a conference room at Ashford Industries facing 11 board members who looked at him like he was something they'd found on the bottom of their shoes. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her expression carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. "Let me understand this correctly," said Gerald Rothstein, the CFO, his voice dripping with condescension. "You want us to allocate $15 million to a charitable fund that will be administered by our cleaning staff." "Former cleaning staff," Marcus corrected quietly. And I'm not proposing that I administer it alone. I'm proposing a partnership structure where people who've experienced medical financial crisis work alongside medical professionals and financial experts to evaluate applications and distribute funds. This is absurd, another board member muttered. Victoria, surely you can't be serious about this. Victoria's jaw tightened. I'm entirely serious. Mr. Webb has spent the past 3 months researching similar programs, building financial models, and conducting interviews with families in crisis. His proposal is sound. His proposal is emotional, Rothstein shot back. You're letting personal feelings cloud your business judgment. Ever since you got involved with this man and his daughter. Careful, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze nitrogen. But the damage was done. Marcus saw it in the subtle shifts around the table, the knowing looks, the barely concealed smirks. They thought he and Victoria were involved romantically. They thought this entire fund was Victoria's way of paying for his affection, an extension of a transaction they couldn't see but could certainly imagine. The meeting ended badly. The board tabled the proposal indefinitely, which everyone understood meant no. As the room cleared, Rothstein paused by Marcus. Word of advice, he said quietly. When you're sleeping your way to the top, try to be less obvious about it. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but he said nothing. Rothstein walked away wearing a satisfied smile. Victoria found Marcus on the building's roof terrace, the same place where she sometimes came to escape the suffocation of her own empire. I'm sorry, she said. I should have anticipated their resistance. They think we're sleeping together, Marcus said flatly. I know. Victoria's voice was tight. Rothstein has been whispering that particular poison for weeks. Apparently the idea that I might value your insight for legitimate reasons is incomprehensible. Maybe we should stop, Marcus said. Maybe I should step back before this damages you further. Absolutely not. Victoria turned to face him directly. I've spent my entire life caring what men, like Rothstein, think. I've shaped myself to fit their expectations, played by their rules, made myself smaller so they'd feel bigger. I'm done with that. Victoria? 3 months ago, I was so lonely I tried to buy companionship from a desperate father. Her voice cracked. I made the most shameful offer of my life, because I'd forgotten that connection can't be purchased. You reminded me. Emma reminded me. And I will not let men who've never had to choose between dignity and survival tell me that your voice doesn't matter. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll fund it myself, personally, not through the company. $30 million to start. And I want you to run it. Not as my employee, not as someone I'm doing a favor for, but as the director of an independent foundation. Victoria, that's the Victoria Ashford Foundation for Medical Equity, she continued. You choose the board. You design the application process. You decide who gets funded and how much. I provide the money and stay out of your way. Why would you do that? Victoria looked out at the city spreading beneath them. Because Emma is thriving. Because watching her recovery taught me that money should flow toward life, not accumulate in accounts I'll never touch. Because you were right that night when you refused my offer. Some things can't be bought, but they can be freely given. Marcus found his voice. I don't know how to run a foundation. Neither did I when I started my first company. Victoria smiled, but I learned. So will you. 6 months later, the foundation opened its doors in a renovated building in North Philadelphia, close to the communities it served. Emma cut the ribbon, still thin but glowing with health, her dinosaur T-shirt bright against the gray November sky. Mrs. Chen was there, and Miguel, and dozens of neighbors who'd contributed what they could to Marcus's original crowdfunding campaign. Victoria stood to the side, not at the center. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was step back and let others lead. The Foundation's first year funded 83 medical procedures for families in crisis. The second year, 147. By the third year, they'd expanded to include housing assistance, transportation support, and childcare services. Marcus hired people who understood poverty not academically but intimately. Former patients became case managers, parents who'd navigated the system became navigators for others. And Victoria, slowly, carefully, learned how to be present without controlling. She attended Foundation events but didn't speak unless asked. She wrote checks but didn't dictate terms. She showed up, and that was enough. One evening, Marcus found her sitting alone in the Foundation's small library, a room Emma had insisted they include because sick kids need stories. Victoria was reading The Velveteen Rabbit, tears streaming down her face. "Sophie's favorite," she said when she noticed him. "I haven't been able to read it since she died." Marcus sat beside her. "What changed?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe I'm finally strong enough. Maybe I finally have enough people around me to hold me together if I fall apart." She closed the book gently. "Thank you." "For what?" "For refusing me when I was at my worst. For seeing past my money to the person underneath. For teaching me that real connection requires vulnerability, not transaction." She paused. "For being my friend even though I didn't know how to be yours." Marcus took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the months of working side by side. "You saved my daughter's life." "You saved mine," Victoria replied, "just in a different way." They sat together in the quiet library, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of moments and built something that would outlast them both. Outside, Emma played in the Foundation's courtyard with other children whose families had been helped. Their laughter drifted through the windows like music. Victoria had learned that loneliness wasn't solved by transactions. Marcus had learned that sometimes the powerful needed saving too, and together they were proving that the distance between penthouse and poverty wasn't as fixed as the world pretended. It just required someone brave enough to refuse the wrong offer and someone humble enough to give without demanding anything in return. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.